What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back. It is day 39 and still no murder suspect or no person of interest named, no weapon to be found anywhere. But as always, we've found two phenomenal guests and you're in for a special treat today. Quick introduction. On the top of the screen is Jim Van Allen. He is a certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He has over 31 years experience in law enforcement and investigations, that with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15 of which were spent as the manager of the OPP Criminal Profiling Unit. And down below, with the sweet Christmas tree and the red and white to match, is Scott Roeder. He is founder of the Evidence Room. He's an internationally recognized evidence specialist who has consulted over 1,500 cases and probably more since this was written, since 2001. He has professional training in crime and shooting scene reconstruction, which makes him a qualified expert witness. So you can see him on the witness stand. The Evidence Room, you should check out the website if you haven't already. It employs a team of specialists with backgrounds in art, 3D modeling, forensic animation, motion graphics, time-based media, biomedical illustration, architectural design, law and crime, and shooting scene reconstruction. Check out the Evidence Room, and I believe he has a podcast with the very same name. A quick housekeeping note on my end. You can listen. People have been asking to this show anywhere podcasts are found. If you want to get the newsletter, you just drop it in YouTube comments. If you want to support us, hit Patreon and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And as Jim knows, because he's been here before and Scott's about to find out, I always like to start the show because these become whodunits. We forget the victims themselves. So let's start with their names. So let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Zana Kernodal, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. So not a whole lot of news today, kind of a lull in the story, if you will. The latest, however, which will be a little dated by the time this comes out, Moscow police have ruled out any connection between that damaged car found in Eugene, Oregon, and the brutal murders of the 4 University of Idaho students about 500 to 700 miles away in Moscow. Police came out and say the vehicle is registered out of Colorado, and the female owner is not believed to have any relation to any property in Moscow, Idaho, or the ongoing murder investigation. So, Jim, to you first, is that a blow, if you will, to the investigation? People were hanging their hopes on this white Hyundai Elantra for which a bolo went out about 2 weeks ago.
Well, I don't think it's a blow. I mean, they're following what the chief recently released were 10,000 different leads. The car is just one of them. All leads don't check out. They're tips. They, it should be looked into. It was determined not to be connected to the investigation, and they're moving on to the other 9,999 tips.
Relay today, and that is we've got word about back to school, which for me was always scary as a kid because I didn't like to go to do my homework, and my parents dragged me there. But now this takes on a whole new meaning, going back to the University of Idaho after these heinous crimes. So it was announced that classes are going to resume on January 11th. What's interesting is they've also announced the school that they're adding more security on campus. They're distributing Birdie personal safety alarms. They're offering self-defense workshops and stalking awareness education, among other safety measures. Scott, you're no stranger to horrific crime scenes. Do you think this will appease any of the students? A lot of kids didn't come back after Thanksgiving.
Well, I think that it's a good step in making people feel a little more comfortable. Anytime you give people tools that empower them to defend themselves, give them more information, give them a sense of feeling more confident, I think that's a good thing to do. Whether it's going to actually do anything regarding the investigation, I doubt it. I think one of the things that is an interesting point is I was a little bit critical in the beginning of this case in my own mind when I was following it, that everybody was allowed to go home from the school campus so quickly without giving any kind of an appropriate head count of who might be missing, who might be acting bizarre in the direct days just after the murders. Letting everybody go home, I think, causes a little bit of dissipation of some of that transient observable evidence that you might be able to see on individuals. So having everybody back in campus, I think, is a great idea as soon as possible. But I think, we want to start looking at, well, who's not coming back now? Although I think it's a little bit less relevant now than it would have been the Monday after the murder.
And that's a good point. And we've actually raised that on the show quite a bit. Does it make it more challenging that this is a university community? It is transient in that sense. Jim, we may have even discussed it the last time you were here, but how does it upset the investigative process? Just the mere fact that a lot of students didn't return who potentially could have information, Jim?
Well, I think judging from the public response to this particular crime, as names come up, they're going to pursue them. They're going to reach out to them. They're just not going to say, Bob's gone home for 3 weeks, we can't talk to him. But if they really want to talk to a witness, they're going to track them down, get the contact information. They'll pursue it. It will be nice when they come back. I agree totally with what Scott said about, you missed the opportunity to observe what might be meaningful behavior. We used to call this post-offense behavior, where some people might do things that destroy evidence, clean their clothing, get rid of the knife. Some people change their appearance. Some people rely more on alcohol and drugs to deal with the stress after a big crime. And that's that. If they miss that, that's just one part of it. But they're going to make the link between the offender and this crime scene by forensic evidence. And that's going to be the big thing that makes the day and proves the link between somebody in the crime scene and likely activity surrounding the injuries and deaths caused to the victims.
And we had retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Koffendorfer on, and she explained, with the FBI now involved, that they've got plenty of agents. So like you said, Jim, if there is a student or someone they want to talk to in a different state or elsewhere, they've got FBI leads that will go and kindly knock on those doors and get the information that they need. So Scott was kind enough, since he's an expert in his own area, to provide some angles for today's discussion. One of them is one that we've been talking about quite a bit, and I'd like to get both your takes. And let's start with Jim, and then we'll wind up with Scott on this. But just bottom line question, Jim, is this a cold or hot case at this very moment?
This is very hot. This has an incredible amount of resources and personnel being applied to it. They're doing all the forensics. They're getting their analysis. This is high gear.
And so let's just say this setback with the Elantra that everyone was looking for, it's a big fat nothing burger, but the investigation is still moving full steam ahead. Scott, is that right?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a hot case right now. The information that I've been trying to collect online with regard to family statements, obviously you can understand the frustration level and even, post-traumatic stress being a driving factor in some of the family members that are speaking out. So I wouldn't be overly critical of anybody that's coming forward as a family member at this point in time, but I would be extremely careful about listening to anybody giving a public statement, any witnesses that are putting themselves in the light to talk about things on social media, whether it's a podcast or whether it's on Instagram or anything like that. I think that there's a lot of data to go through. I think the police do have a couple of suspects that they like in this, but they're not going to be telling everything that they know, obviously, to the general public. And I think in some regard, that's a good tactic because they could flush out a potential suspect by lulling them into a sense of complacency. I've seen them do that from time to time. The police are very smart. They know what they're doing. And I think now that the FBI is involved and the resources that they have, and listen, the FBI is the world's most advanced crime-solving organization. And I think this case is as hot now as it was on day one.
Interesting. We had Chris Anderson on yesterday, who's from the first 48 Birmingham series. He's dealt, I believe, with 300 or 400 homicide cases. And, he agreed with you. This is definitely a hot case, says that law enforcement knows exactly what they're doing. And I bring it up because a few videos have leaked over the past couple of days. And I asked him, I asked him what his theory was on why we're seeing these videos. And he said it could be, he didn't say definitely, it could be actually being leaked by law enforcement to maybe draw someone out. Scott, you're shaking your head. Yes. Is that a tactic potentially?
I think it would definitely be a tactic. You want, if you have a suspect, I think that you like, but you need them to make a mistake. The best way for you to get a suspect to make a mistake is to make them feel like they're not a suspect. Make them feel like they're getting away with it. And a lot of times, and I don't want to go over into Jim areas of expertise, and I'm sure you can talk about this much more eloquently than I can, but there's a certain psychological aspect to a post-crime perpetrator. And if this person is not a sophisticated individual, say they are sophisticated in a way that they're sociopathic, one of the things that sociopaths will want is they'll want credit. And if they feel like they're not garnering any attention, they might act out. And I think it could be a ploy to draw out a suspect.
Jim, curious about your thoughts about what Scott just said. And also, can you just remind the audience your profile that you've sort of created for this potential suspect or suspects?
Well, dealing with the first part, is this a law enforcement strategy? It could be. That was a big part of what we would do in the behavioral sciences section, dealing with a case that had gone about as far as it was going to go. We would start working on different strategies, and I won't expand on them too much because I don't want to torpedo anything that's going on in Moscow right now or any other place associated to this investigation. But there's a number of things we used to do to befriend, communicate with, and open up an opportunity for a dialogue about person's involvement with a crime or knowledge about a crime. And many times he was in the presence of law enforcement and being recorded 8 ways from Sunday. And there are some cases where there's no more evidence to get. You need the evidence to come out of the suspect's mouth. And we would structure scenario around the suspect to engage him in conversation about it. And we received many, many admissions and confessions for violent crimes in the past. Profile, didn't really do a profile, Joel, but I do think that this is in there. I believe it's a single offender. He went in there to kill everybody that was in the house or everybody he knew that was in the house. I think we can't ignore the fact that 3 of the victims are female. Now, that's who's living there, but if there's no other sign of robbery, these people aren't known for some particular office they hold or a function they perform. Three were women. And we do find that that's the case in a lot of mass murders, school shootings, that the majority of victims are female. And that, of course, opens a lot of speculation as to, does the offender have some misogynistic dislike for women and targeted some of the women in the house.
And Scott, your specialty is obviously crime scenes, crime scene reconstruction, but you've covered enough cases and been around enough of these that I'm sure you have an idea in your own mind of who the suspect could be. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, sure. You can break down most murders in the United States into a couple of categories when it comes to a domestic murder, right? Somebody killed inside of their home where it's not related to robbery or anything like that, right? So most, I think 49% of all domestic related murders are an acquaintance, then a stranger, than an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend. That is the big bucket of who we're looking at here. I think we're looking at a white male, 18 to 35. And we're looking at either, now it could be a number of things, but in my mind, if I was investigating this, I'd be looking at ex-lovers, jilted lovers, perceived lovers that were lost, because love could sometimes just go one way, a rejected lover. And then the other category is a phenomenon known, maybe just a term that just was invented in the last 10 years, 5 years ago, called an incel, an involuntary celibate individual. And these people, they tend to congregate on like the 4chan and the anonymous type of things. They tend to be heavily into violent video game culture. And listen, I'm a kid from the 80s. All right. I'm not trying to dump on video games or rock and roll music. Listen, I listen to rock and roll music. I'm not a bad guy. But you can't discount the cultural aspect of these types of behavior that breed solitary madmen. And if you look at the majority of the mass murders, whether it's and unfortunately, God forbid, they've been mostly these school shootings. These are isolated, ostracized, solitary individuals that lash out because of perceived insult by the community at large. And these girls, and I think the guy, Seth. I just tried to remember his name. Ethan, I'm sorry. I think he might have been a casualty. Maybe because he didn't live there full time. So I think this house was all girls. And I think that what that house represented was something the killer didn't have, but wanted, which was either beautiful girls or love or friendship that either this person was never able to get or was denied specifically. And I think that is a profile that I would be tracking down pretty hard.
Very insightful. Jim, I know we spoke offline via email and you had some things you wanted to say about the whole incel community. What could you add?
Well, I gave a pretty good rundown overview of what an incel is. It's a growing internet subculture that finds like-minded individuals in chat rooms and forums and 4chan, 8chan, things like that, and they form an online brotherhood. And the worrisome part is that they encourage others to violence. And it's actually considered an extremism. And we had a incel mass murder in Toronto, Canada in 2018. And under our laws, they were able to charge him with terrorism-related murder because it's felt to be so extreme. And they're very much against feminism. They blame society, they blame their own genetics, they blame shallowness of women for them not being able to obtain a relationship or a sexual relationship. And the personality, very hateful, very misogynistic, that would definitely have to be a consideration for this investigative team.
So, Jim, I remember back in 2001, after the terror attacks, you always heard about the FBI monitoring, quote unquote, chatter. Does that go on in a situation like this? Can you bet that FBI agents are going into some of these 4chan meeting rooms and seeing if they can pick up clues? Are the authorities constantly monitoring what's happening online?
I wouldn't say anybody is policing the internet. That, I think, would be mission impossible for any agency. But yes, there are people that dip into the dark web and these chat rooms. I don't know if they're particularly looking for evidence of or reference to this, although there would be references to this. Like we noticed, like we collectively noticed that there was an increase in chatter from incels even after the Uvalde school shooting. And although the victims were quite young, the misogynistic concept was that they probably prevented some young girls from growing up that would rebuff males down the road. So that was a good thing. And that just goes to show how toxic thinking and rigid thinking these people are. And they encourage new members and tend to groom and radicalize new members as well. So yes, this concept of incels has a potential to spawn future violent crime. There's no doubt about it.
Scott, great guess is what make this a great show. And in that vein, we had on, she was an original FBI mindhunter working with that team. Her name is Ann Burgess, still working, 86 years old, very interesting. She talked about the change in crime from, let's say, the early 60s with the advent of technology. I'm just curious because you're really a tech guy. You're building things three-dimensionally, recreating crime scenes. So how do you think crime has changed, even in just the last bunch of years with the advent of Instagram, Facebook, social media, 4chan, all these things? How, if at all, has it impacted the crime scene?
Well, I think it's impacted the crime scene in that you see more sensational crimes because the crimes are getting more sensational. They're getting more daring. Places are being targeted that were never thought of being targeted in the past. Soft targets, targets that get immediate live streamed audiences. And then the ability of people to anonymously applaud from the sidelines, which was not possible before in some of these chat rooms and so on. If you can think about the sycophant or the sociopath or the sadomasochistic Machiavellian type of incel that we're looking at here, part of the joy of them doing the crime is being able to gloat about it, potentially even being able to gloat about it anonymously online. Now, the crimes that I work on, over the last 10 years, unfortunately, have been more police officer involved related crimes, both defending the police in cases and also being on the other side as well. Because I'm not an ideologue. My ideology is the truth, regardless of who it pins underneath that awful guilt label. But as far as the modern day, I think that we've got all kinds of problems that help solve the crime, like social media. And I think like what Jim says, I think DNA forensic evidence will be extremely important ultimately in the court of law. But social media is going to be extremely important to track down this killer, to bring him out of the weeds, because this killer, I think, is going to be tempted to jump into the conversation if he already isn't in the conversation online. And I think that they should have a number of these FBI agents scouring Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and any other digital interactive format that these girls or anybody would have been involved in that could have brought in strangers or acquaintances from the outside to give them a glimpse inside of that home. See, that's where I think is the big thing. So now if you're a killer out there and you want to target somebody because they have something you don't have to do all that much work to go from their Twitter account to their Instagram account to any other account and watch the people. These people are not dumb people hiding in the bushes with an axe. These are cold, calculated, motivated, research-based individuals. And that's what shows in this case. Because if this kid wasn't so sloppy, if this kid was sloppy, he'd be in handcuffs right now and we'd all be barbecuing him over a spit. But he's still out there. That means he's smart. He was careful. He planned this for a considerable period of time. And as far as he knows right now, he's getting away with it.
And you bring up an interesting point. I mean, someone could be stalking potentially these people on Instagram, but the flip side of that is police can use social media as a tool to draw people in. And what was interesting, and I think I discussed this the last time Jim was on the show, after I did that episode with Ann Burgess and a very well-known psychologist who also studies serial killers, they flagged me right after the show and they said, hey, look at this one comment. And the one comment stood out from all the rest. It was very misogynistic. Jim, I sent that to you, I believe. Did that stand out to you in any way? And do you think that the killer could be involving himself in online discussions the way Scott suggested?
Could be. You certainly can't eliminate that as a possibility. Yes, you did send me those comments that were received post. It's Gary Ricardo that picked that up, and you sent it to me. I did look at it. It was very much in line with the incel ideology. Although he wasn't claiming that he followed it, he was taking a stand on it, but he sure knew a lot about it. I didn't get the sense from, it was a very arm's length type of comment, and I didn't get the sense that there was specific knowledge of the crime, certainly no bragging, no indication that he knew about it or had committed the crime, but he understands the mindset. Let's put it that way, and I think this might be an individual that struggles with social relationships as well. But yeah, that's the type of thing that law enforcement should be looking at and considering as a possible role. The incel crimes, they're very high profile. Often they're caught immediately after. It's like a spree, and they keep going. And there's often a component of suicide in it as well. And that's lacking out of this. Now,
I have a question for you, Jim. Here's my question. Do you think that the killer is surprised that he hasn't been caught yet?
No, a lot of killers have a wish to avoid apprehension. He's clearly not doing anything that's drawing attention to himself right now. Like you say, as far as he sees it, he's getting away with it right now. And whether it's by more good luck than good management, it's hard to say. But you can't commit a crime like that without leaving evidence of yourself at the scene. and they're going to get it. And whether he's on a DNA database or not, they're going to eventually trip across him and ask for a DNA sample. I would think.
Scott, we've all seen the home in Moscow. You see it obviously through a different lens than just about anyone else. As it pertains to someone following these young four people home or waiting inside already, do you have a take one way or the other on that?
Well, I think it could be either or. After looking at the property, and I'm actually in the process right now building a 3D model of the exterior of the home and the surrounding property. There's woods behind the house and a chain link fence, and there's other property behind there. So somebody could have been lying in wait, waiting for them to get home without a car even being present. And then when they left, they could just hop the fence and just get over that way. That's why one of the first things I wanted to have done the day of the murder was you get every bloodhound from every, dog sniffing, professional agency out there. And I'm a proud owner of a German short-haired pointer, one of the best noses in the business. You get 10, 12 of those dogs out there, and they're going to pick up anybody who was in that house when you canvass that neighborhood with those dogs. Excuse me.
But they didn't do that, right? They did not do that. Do we know that?
And they didn't have it available. It's a small department. The state highway patrol's not even going to have that. Most of those dogs are in private owners' hands. Like, for example, my dog was a trained cadaver dog, and then we would volunteer after, say, a tornado or some kind of a catastrophe to go in and see if we could help recover bodies. So a lot of that is privately held dogs that are trained, and then it's a volunteer force. Unless you're a big department where you have that, kind of a canine unit. A lot of canine units are for defense, tracking people down, or drug sniffing. Finding people is a different kind of a training. Not every dog can do all of those skills. It's very specific skill training. So that would be a hard thing to garner. But if that's something that you could think of right away, you could bring the dogs in, sterilize that scene as much as you could, and try to get those dogs onto a scent of somebody that was recently in that house. And if somebody did jump over that back fence and through the woods, you would know right then and there. Or if they got away in a car, they'd take you down the road through that car. But let me get back to your original question. Could you restate that? Because I kind of took us on a little bit of a sidetrack there.
I think we were talking
the 3D nature. Yeah. The 3D nature of the house. So one of the first things that I would do when you get in that scene is you bring in a 3D LiDAR scanner, and to not disturb the blood or the bodies. I would leave the bodies there. I would leave the blood there, leave everything there until you have a 3D laser scanner. And now, I drone indoors and do a 3D scan with a drone. So you don't even have to disturb the scene, and you can just fly through the house. I did that in a very rudimentary way when I did the Oscar Pistorius case down in South Africa. That was a very bloody scene. I was there a week after it happened. And that was one of the techniques that I used at that time was a drone. Now you can actually attach 3D laser to those drones, extrude that into 3D. And then it's about analyzing the interrelationship of each piece of physical and forensic evidence from a causation standpoint. I think there's still so much to learn, and they haven't even gotten to the stage of reconstruction on this crime yet, because right now they're still processing the blood, processing the hair, the tissue, trying to delineate the overlapping of the forensic evidence, because a lot of that's going to be so complicated. I was thinking about it, like if I walked into that scene, first responder, where do you start? Where do you start? It's such an overwhelming task. And if you've never done that before, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're not going to know what to do first. So I give a lot of credit for those guys. And listen, these police officers might even be going through post-traumatic stress right now for what they've seen, I've had some situations where I've been on a scene where, I was unexpectedly confronted with a dead body that was decapitated, or that was deteriorating under a floorboard. after 3 weeks in the Phoenix sun, and I passed out. It was just a shock. The sense, the smell, the visual of it. It's a shock. So I wouldn't be surprised if these guys, had a hard time.
Yeah, they're young guys. Jim, to Scott's point, I know you're more on the profiling side. You're the lead investigator. You walk into that crime scene, 4 bodies brutally murdered. Where would you start, Jim?
Well, you're going to do a quick overview without contaminating anything. You're going to go through and just see what it is you have, and then probably your forensic people are going to go in, and I would, if I was the lead investigator, I'd ask for an overview video, just rough data, do each room, do the movement between room to room, do a survey of broken windows, open doorways, locks, everything else, and then everybody withdraws, and then the forensic people go in and they start doing room by room examination of everything that's there, recovering the evidence. And I'm not, they probably have different teams for exterior and interior, but I think you'd let the same people go through and do all the interior work. You'd probably have them supported by maybe one detective in there making observations of them. Everybody else would be doing the interviewing and getting the other people in the house, reaching out to parents, talking to best friends and things like that to upload as much evidence as you get. Body removal from the scene. They go for postmortem examination. That's a whole other story. Normally, the police go and accompany them and observe the procedures. And it's the first couple of days are very intense of assimilating a whole mountain of information, and you start generating tips and leads and assign them, and your manager manages and the investigators investigate.
This is where I want to go Joe Rogan on you guys and keep you here for 3 hours, which we can't do, but we've got a chunk of time left, and I want to try to get through a bunch more. Scott, it's interesting. You said you're building the exterior of reconstructing the exterior of the home. I'm just curious, how long does a process like that take for you? And is that just for your own edification to build that and look at it, or are you using that from some other purpose?
No, I'm just doing it for my purpose because I've been following this case. This case has really affected me just on a personal standpoint. I mean, my daughter's 25 years old. I have two sons that are older than that now, 30 and 27, and I feel real. I want to try to contribute something. So once I get it done, and it takes about 6 hours to get it done from that standpoint, it gives you the ability to manipulate it and control it inside of that 3D environment. And there's a couple things that I looked at just from the exterior is, we have that ladder that's sitting right there. Above the ladder on the second floor, there seems to be a red staining area. Could be dirt, could be blood on that roof. It'd be interesting to know, I think the height of that ladder, how many feet it is from that ladder to that second landing, to see, how tall somebody would have to be to get comfortably from that ladder to that roof and into that window, and then spinning it around so that you can see from every surrounding property who could see in and who could see out. I think that's going to be important for witness statement, impeachment, and verification. There's witnesses in the apartment building on one side that say some things that seem to be somewhat consistent, somewhat inconsistent. But then again, there's tons of rumor involved in it now. But I think it's a good tool to examine people's testimony. And now I did find one piece of information from a forensic standpoint that I think is really important. And it was from this one YouTuber, Truth and Transparency, Lana Arani. Fantastic work she does. And she went and found on the Wayback Machine, which is a website. I apologize. That's my phone. Let me cancel that real quick. Okay. On the Wayback Machine, the University of Idaho website, the night of the murders went down. The server went down at 11:58 p.m. and the server went back up at 6:58 p.m. So the website server for the University of Idaho was down in the window of the planning, the murder, and the getaway of the murder. And what that means is if that's down, all security cameras communicating with the University of Idaho campus would have been shut down as well. And I think somebody would have, now those anomalies happen, internet goes down all the time. But the thing that tipped us off to it was in one of the original day one photographs, you see the TV through the sliding glass windows and it said no signal. Now, there's no reason why that signal would have been cut unless that house lost power. Or so there's a chance. I mean, I would think that everybody still lived there, so they're still paying their bills. I'm sure they probably still had TV. So for that to say no signal, and then the Wayback Machine on the night of the murder saying that the security camera footage on the website for the University of Idaho was down in the critical time of the planning act and the getaway of the murder, I think that's an awful coincidence and needs to be looked into.
And that's been confirmed that the website was down?
Anybody can look at it. You go to the waybackmachine.com, type in University of Idaho, and you'll see that their server was down for that 6-hour window.
And Jim, assuming that is true and corroborated, do you agree with Scott? Does that need to be looked into? Is it possible that the perpetrator purposely brought that down?
Well, I would think anybody that sophisticated, I'm not a tech guy, but that would seem very sophisticated to me. And anybody that sophisticated probably would show up with a different weapon than a knife. And yeah, sure. Assign somebody to ask the tech guy for the university, what's up? What happened there? Glitches like this do happen. I mean, my internet's down all the time. Our provider in this area is not 5G. And stuff like that happens. And there's always a workaround. You just got to shake your head and say, we're not going to get any evidence out of that. If all this stuff is down, if the cameras aren't working, we can't count on that. So you're going to look for other cameras that might be helpful to you. You're always going to try and maximize evidence that's available. If that's not available to you, that's unfortunate. But talk to the tech department and see what explanation they give. And it might just be one of those things, broken part, malfunction, don't know. Stuff like that happens, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. I can't tell you the number of surveillance cameras at homicide scenes I've looked at, and it's hanging on the wall, but it's not working. Or all you got
to do is ask. All you have to. I don't mean to make a joke, but you ask Jeffrey Epstein's about the cameras not working, right?
That's interesting, and right away you can see Jim's profile or mind, because right away he says if the computers went down, this guy wasn't using a knife. It's interesting to look at the mind.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that, Jim. Just for not to be combative, but thinking about it, if you think about Idaho, that place is set in a bit of a canyon, and it's a quiet neighborhood, right? Or it's a quiet area. It's not like Cleveland, Ohio, or Los Angeles. A gunshot is going to ring out in Idaho for miles. I wouldn't use a gun. If I would use a knife, because one thing about a knife is they're quiet as long as you kill the victims quickly. But guns are loud. And I think in that kind of an area, wide open spaces in a canyon where everything echoes, I think I would not expect a gun to be used. And plus, I think a knife is, I wouldn't call a knife unsophisticated. Knife is personal, right? And knife is almost sexual in that it penetrates the victim.
Freudian. That's pretty Freudian.
Well, I mean, there's aspects to it.
Yeah.
I've never seen a knife murder that wasn't personal.
What I would look at for a knife murder is how the knife was used. If you want to look at sophistication, composure, confidence, and strength, you look at whether the wounds are instrumental. I'm going to kill you, and I was able to do it with 3 solid stab wounds to your chest. But those that lack criminal experience and are unable to control their victims, you see longer, protracted battles, and this guy's trying to get the knife into his victim, and they're resisting, and the wounds change. You get glancing blows, you get superficial wounds, you get movement indicated in the shape of the wound and everything else. Those that are experienced at violence are more competent at violence. And the only thing, and I can't say a sophisticated person would never use a knife. People use what's available to them, what they're familiar with, and what they're good at when it comes to weapon selection. And not to argue, but talking about firearms and whatnot, them being so loud. I stood at the front door of a house one night where a 12-gauge shotgun went off in the house. I never heard the bang. And this was not a real urban area. This was more rural. Canadian houses are well insulated, I'll give you that. But, we knew that there was a gun at play in the house, and I was listening intently at the door. And someone shot themselves inside the house. I never heard. So, you got to be there. You got to do a test run to be able to say somebody would have heard a gun. I'd say fire off a couple blanks in the house and measure them and see what's detectable.
Well, I mean, I mean, if you're looking at stealthiness, right? If you're looking to get away with it and you're trying to be as stealthy as possible, and listen, we don't know. We haven't seen the photographs. I think we're trying to, put ourselves in the mind of what are good questions to ask, right, Jim? And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that I think it's a question to consider.
I would agree.
And Scott, to you, yeah. Crime scene challenges with a small police department. There's been a lot of talk about Moscow. It's a town of 26,000 people. They say that the lead investigator has 2 years at that department. What are the challenges with collection and contamination issues, laboratory processing, and also does the FBI involvement help with that?
I think the answer to your second question is yes. The FBI involvement helps with that. I'm not going to dump on a small police department. Listen, there's a reason why I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and not Los Angeles. There's a reason why people live in Idaho and not Chicago, is because you want to be in a town where there's not a lot of crime. In small towns, there's not a lot of crime. And so you can't blame a small town for not being prepared to deal with a big crime. So I'm not blaming them whatsoever. I know they're doing the best that they can. And they had the Idaho State Police, which are very experienced, that were there right away. FBI, my understanding, was there day 2, which is extremely helpful. Now, in processing the crime scene, that's very challenging because you have blood and fibers and tissue and potentially fingernails and saliva, hair, clothing fibers that are mixing from one victim to the other victim in the bed in all kinds. And I'm sure it's a bunch, kids live in there. It's not a clean house with things all tidy and whatnot, right? So that's a tremendous challenge on how to collect it, how to bag it, and then the FBI is going to be extremely helpful in processing that, along with the Idaho Department of Bureau of Investigations, which every state has their own laboratory. But I'm sure a lot of it's going to the FBI. I'm sure the FBI is helping on collecting it. Now, here's the problem. Now, I think there's still valuable evidence in the house today, right now. Matter of fact, I worked on a case in Boston just about a year ago where it was a murder. The question was it suicide? Was it murder? And then I went in there 3 weeks after it happened, and I dug a bullet out of the wall that was missed by initial first responders because they were dealing with the dead body. So I think going back into that house even today is extremely important. Going on the carpet, on the floor, everywhere inside of that house, looking for something. And like Jim said, you always leave a trace. Edwin Lacard developed that principle a long time ago. Whenever you leave a room, you leave something. Whenever you enter a room, you leave something behind and you take something with you. That killer left something behind, whether it was something on his shoe, his clothes, a fingernail, a hair, spit, his own blood, whatever it might be. He's got something that's still there in that house. That house needs to be secured. I think all that carpet needs to be taken out of the house and bagged up and taken back to the FBI. And they need to go over that carpet with a fine-tooth comb looking for anything out of place, because there is going to be a suspect at some point that's going to submit to forensic testing. And you need to have a sample of every part, not just a section of carpet, the whole carpet, not just part of the bed, the whole bed, all of the clothes, anything that was exposed, left out, the contents of the garbage can, everything, nearby dumpsters, looking in the sewer. Everything needs to be collected and brought back and preserved. This is a big crime scene. There's a lot of evidence. And if you just leave it sit there, you can always go back to it, but don't release that house until you have an arrest.
And this is particularly interesting. This episode will publish on Thursday, and Tuesday of this week, investigators were back at the house with a black Helican type briefcase. And I asked Chris Anderson again at First 48, who was on the show, did you ever go back to a home? And he said, he kind of laughed at me and said he's gone back to crime scenes 3 months after the fact. So it's not really, it's not so unusual, Jim, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. Scott's right that there's a mountain of evidence in there that has to be sampled and collected, and articles and bedding, clothing from each victim. And all of those are going to be preserved, like handled properly, dried, examined for, knife tears, things like that. Even tears in seam that might be suggestive that there was a struggle. He was trying to grab the victim was pulling away and ripped a seam. Even that's going to be examined and interpreted. Cross-contamination, you might get contamination, commingling of bodily fluids that would suggest a certain order of activity that would provide you with the sequence of events and assist in a reconstruction of what things happen. And then Scott would do the video that would build that to demonstrate it to the investigative team and the court, because the big point in all of this is not just solve the crime, it's solve it in a way that's going to be to a court standard and allow for the meaningful communication of all the evidence and demonstration of the evidence to a court, so a jury or a judge can make the appropriate decisions about somebody's guilt or innocence.
There's one more point that Scott had mentioned that I want to go over, and then if you guys will indulge me, we'll take some viewer comments and we'll call it a wrap. But Scott, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the family investigation. I know we've heard from Stephen Gonzalez. Kaylee's father's been out there quite a bit. He's got an attorney representing him, trying to get information. Does this complicate Scott? Does it complicate the investigation from a law enforcement standpoint?
I don't think so. I think you have to give the family a lot of latitude here. I know if it was me, I'd be out there with an army of private investigators and experts doing what I could do to solve the crime for my own family. So I would never ever criticize Steve Gonzalez for doing what he's doing. And what you have to do, I think, in law enforcement, instead of complaining, and I don't know if they're complaining or not, but instead of being critical of the father and his parallel investigation, open up, work with his family, sign, have an agreement of confidentiality. Okay, Steve, you can still have your private thing, but let's have a powwow. Let's talk together. Let's share the data. And I think the reason that Steve is going out there and maybe flying off the handle a little bit to the media and being overly critical is because he's not getting enough information. And I don't know why that is. The first and last person these investigators should be calling every day is the parents of all four of these kids. Call them when you wake up, call them when you go to bed. These are your clients, right? Your clients are the parents of these four kids. And you should have people assigned to talk to these people twice a day, giving them updates. You don't leave them hanging in the dark. And what you do is you just modify what you're doing to factor in what they're doing. And who knows, maybe they'll shake something out of the weeds because they're not bound by the same rules as law enforcement. So I would say maybe not encourage them for a parallel investigation, but allow them, understand it, be considerate. I think share information and certainly accept any information that they've uncovered on their own. And who knows, maybe something comes out. But I think where this possibly a hot lead comes from is from the Gen Zs out there in the community, right? This is the first Gen Z major kind of a murder case where all of these kids of this age group are kind of bringing in their slang that these kids use that you and I and Jim don't use, emojis, reactions, things that we have no idea about that kids this age are going to have some insight. So I think they're going to need to have people this age involved in the investigation to help them interpret the social media language and interactions and all that stuff to see what are the hidden meanings behind some of these veiled comments and posts pre-murder, during, and then the post stuff I don't think is going to be important, but forensically going back a year or two on all four of these people's Facebook page, Twitter page, Reddit, Snapchat, whatever they have out there, forensically going back on that is going to be critical.
A lot of work to be done. Let's get to some comments, tweets, and questions. The first one actually I came across today, which is probably the most important, comes from Sheldon Kernodle, who I believe is Xana's father. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. Tweeting out, as we find ourselves in the season of giving, I ask for those who are willing and able to donate to Xana's scholarship endowment to honor her memory and keep her legacy alive. I will put a link to this on our YouTube page, but there's a phone number where you can just make a donation. It is 208-855-4000. That's 208-855-4000. We all know the family could use as much support as possible. And they will match dollar for dollar. The family's going to match up to $10,000. So no better place to donate and spend your holiday money this season than with them. First comment comes from Chico's Mummy, who I believe is either Canadian or British, Jim, with the mummy, because we don't say that in America. They say, I'd love it if a reporter would ask Steve Gonzalez if they were offered a victim liaison. I'm going to have to go back and find it, but often near the start of these cases, little snippets of information come out that get glossed over and nobody runs with them. I'm certain that it was reported that they were offered it, but he didn't get on with the person and wanted a direct line to the police chief. Jim, are there typically these victim liaisons for the family? So, he wouldn't have to be as upset as he is right now.
Absolutely. And I agreeing with Scott, the victims' families are a big part of the investigation. And for information, um, just reasons of compassion, you have to have a strong relationship. And I've been the victim family liaison guy on a few cases, and you meet with them all the time. You're the point of contact if they have anything to say, if they have a question to ask. If you don't know the answer, you find the guy on the investigative team and get the information back to them if, in fact, it can be released to the family. Um, there's victim assistance people that will deal with the trauma that they're obviously going through right now, and further compounded by the time of year that it is, and everything else. Um, I think every investigative team should go that extra distance, dealing with the family and maintaining a good relationship with them. Uh, Investigations benefit greatly from good relations with victims' family.
The next comment is from Cookie Kurkowski, and it has to do with a couple of these videos that came out. One was a video from September 1st at the victim's home. The other one was Maddie and Kaylee walking, speaking to a gentleman about the bartender named Adam. This one relates to that. So Cookie writes, and Scott, we'll throw this one to you. I think questioning Adam, the bartender, to find out what Maddie told him could be crucial. Also, should be talking to the hoodie guy and ask him what he knows. And in that video with him walking with the girls, saying they're going to get you for that. That Kaylee says, what did you say to Adam? And Maddie says, I told him everything. So how critical does this evidence become, and how, with what kind of fine-tooth comb are investigators going through this, Scott?
Well, I think that's critical. Now, I heard a comment from one of the parents, I think Steve, that said Adam's been talked to. He's not a suspect. I don't know if I give much credence to that particular comment. I want to know what Adam they're talking about. Apparently, there's an Adam who's a bartender, who's also a member of the fraternity. There's also, a couple of people. It's hard because I don't want to speculate, and I don't want to point fingers at any individuals without any due justice. But there's some suspicious conversation and language going on that needs to get looked into. Now, that doesn't need to get told to the public, but I guarantee you law enforcement has asked Adam, what did Maddie tell you and what was it about, and be honest about it, and when did you get this information? And then also the food truck video is extremely telling. And like, once again, I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but there's a witness who gave testimony about where he was the night of the murders, which conflicts because I found him at the food truck. He never mentioned he was at the food truck, but there's a witness that says I was from here to here from 1:30 to 4 a.m., but we see this person at 1:30, 2 a.m. near the food truck at the same time Maddie and Casey were there. So I think that there's some inconsistencies that law enforcement is going to do. And that's one of the big things that we do in the litigation aspect of our work is we'll take somebody's statement, an eyewitness statement at the time of what they said they saw, and compare that to the physical evidence. And then now you have impeachment stuff to go back to that person. So I'd go back to that witness who told on air in an interview, he said this, I got home at 1:30, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I went to bed at 4 a.m. He never said he was at the food truck, but yet looking at that food truck video, I saw him at the food truck. So I think there's a lot of inconsistencies. Now, these inconsistencies are not necessarily malicious. They could just be inconsistencies or misrecollections You always have to give people the benefit of the doubt. But those are the kind of inconsistencies as an investigator you're looking at to hammer down deeper and deeper to see what other inconsistencies are then there.
And so, Jim, a small omission in law enforcement could be a big deal. I always tell my kids who are little, small words are big words like and the, which they forget to use in sentences. So I'm curious about these small omissions, but also there's a question from Wendy Phillips. And she wants to know if this case is going to change law enforcement communication and interaction with the general public because of, the target, not targeted, targeted, not targeted, you're safe, you're not safe. But I guess the first question is, how big could a small omission be, and will this change the relationship law enforcement has with the public?
Omissions can be very important. I mean, if you're talking about the guilty person, yeah, they're going to purposely omit details, sensitive details. You get them expanding their stories on innocent stuff, just trying to burn off time. And then when they get to the main crux of why we're there, they'll compress it and try and do as little talking as they can. And they'll leave out things that might make them look guilty. But I've seen innocent people do that too, and you have to scratch your head. They make themselves look so guilty. They bring a lot of suspicion on themselves, and when they finally fess up, it's because they just didn't want police to think they were guilty. But they try and make themselves look more innocent. But that, and it's always forensic evidence that clears it up and saves the day. But yes, the timelines of everybody involved, the victims, the people that were around them, the witnesses, I would like to know the timeline in as much complete detail as you could get it, for days, if not weeks, and depending on what's relevant, maybe even months. If this was a stalking case with a background of harassment and intrusive behavior, yeah, I'd like to go back that far and see how it evolved and developed. But not every omission is going to be the aha moment, but you want to weigh it carefully. And like Scott said, when you get those inconsistencies, you're going back to talk to them again. Let's call them, get them in, and run them through another statement. Are they intentionally lying, or were they absent-mindedly neglectful in telling you everything? Or one thing that is also a possibility, did the questions of the investigator fail to pull that information out of them? Because I've seen interviewer interference in the statement taking process. Why didn't you say that at the time? Because you never asked me the question, officer. That type of thing. So, yeah, spot the inconsistencies, go back and do a re-interview and try and patch up the holes, evaluate if they're significant or not. Part two of your question, is it going to change the procedures of the Moscow police in how they give press releases? People make mistakes. I mean, cops are human. Human error reigns supreme in all aspects of the human experience, including homicide investigation. And people misspeak. People improperly pick the wrong terms, rather. I've never seen a case that has been so scrutinized by the public as this one. These guys are under a microscope. And people are trying to make a big deal out of what might be very little inadvertent mistakes. But effective communication on major cases is an important deal. And that's why they have media relations courses for officers to go on. And it's, in this day and age, it's almost a specialty assignment. in a lot of agencies if you have the human resources to assign somebody.
And Scott, I know you mentioned Oscar Pistorius, the famous runner. Where does this rank, do you think, in terms of high-profile cases? Jim just said it's one of the most scrutinized, but where do you rank it in recent high-profile cases?
I think this is as I put this right up there with John Benny Ramsey, and cases like that. This case is dramatic in my lifetime because you see, shooting cases. I'm inundated with shooting cases. That's primarily why I get called, to court qualified in shooting and crime scene reconstruction. And shooting scene is obviously, we live in America. We have more shooting deaths than car accidents, it seems at times. So I think the nature that this was an edged weapon case, that we have 4 victims killed in their bed in the middle of the night, seemingly totally innocent victims that did nothing to bring this upon themselves. It's a substantial case. It's an important case. The number one thing people want is to feel safe in their beds at home at night. The number one thing parents wish for their children is that they're safe in their bed at night. And when something strikes the zeitgeist, like this case, where you're no longer safe in your own bed, it made me stand up and pay attention to this case. And I usually don't pay attention to cases unless I get retained on it. But this case, I think, is special in that this has to be solved. It must be solved. And the integrity of someone's castle to be safe in their home is the cornerstone of what it means to be free, and what it means to be an American is that you can be safe in your bed at night. And this case shakes that to the very foundation.
Very eloquently said. A final comment, and we'll get final thoughts, and we'll call it a wrap. This one comes from Reptiles and BMX, which I'm sure Jim is already profiling this name. Configure the guy out. He writes, I am frustrated that the university and the Moscow Police Department allowed all the students to leave and go home. Each and every student should have been submitting a DNA swab, well, at least from Sigma Chi, the fraternity. My suspicion is that is where the perp resided. Jim, was it feasible to swab every University of Idaho student before they left campus?
I don't think so. In the initial phases of a homicide investigation, particularly a massacre, multiple victim massacre, they've got a mountain of stuff to do. They're going to deal with the priorities. They're going to try and get a handle on this, figure out where they go, where the meaningful investigative avenues lead them. Find a suspect. If you need his DNA or her DNA, ask for it. To just go through and request hundreds of DNA samples right off the bat, I think that's unrealistic and unnecessary. And people's DNA doesn't change. If they're a suspect 8, 10, 12 months down the road, their DNA is still going to be the same. Identify them as a person of interest, a suspect, go ask for their DNA then. If they volunteer it, we analyze it. If they decline giving you the DNA, they got some explaining to do.
What about just the fraternity house? We don't know that they didn't swab everyone at the fraternity house, but should they at least done the entire fraternity house? And Scott, I know you had a point.
Well, I think that the thing I would like to comment about that, I think it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how constitutional it is, and I'm not sure how feasible it is. But I think it's an interesting concept to see the compulsory voluntary nature of these students. And then it gives you the ability to see who did not volunteer, to take a look a little closer. Not saying that they're guilty, but you can if you have a compulsory, everybody's volunteering to provide DNA and just give it to their headmaster or whoever, just drop it off in an envelope, and you get 20,000 people to drop it off or 5,000 people to drop it off, I very doubt that the killer would be one of those people to drop it off. So I think it's probative. Whether it's practical or not, I don't know. But I think after the fact, I think it's an interesting idea, and it should be considered for things like this in the future to weed out potential non-cooperative members of the citizenry.
I think it's a smart idea. Jim, will this killer be caught?
Yes, without question. There's just too much will to pursue this investigation. From the outside, I see sound investigative effort going on. They asked for and they're employing all proper resources, and they're very well supported by law enforcement partners, being the state police and the FBI. And this is one insignificant little murderer up against a very skilled and well-resourced investigative team. I think it's a matter of time.
Scott, where do we go from here, and will the killer be caught? You get the final word.
Well, I think where we go to here is I think we let the police do their job. They're going to find this killer. It's a matter of time. And I think the only question is going to be now, is the killer going to be found alive, or will we find his dead body? And I think that's what it comes down to. Do we catch him alive, or do we just catch his corpse? I hope we catch him alive, because these are the kind of people that need to be made an example of. We need to understand why, and we need to understand how to prevent it from happening in the future. And that's why you hope for a live catch on this. I think everybody would be happy with catching him dead. It's satisfying, but that's not productive moving forward. So I think they will catch him. It's a matter of time. And I just tell everybody, have faith and pray, and pray for strength, that these investigators stay on path, and they need your support. And we need to be supportive for everything the investigators are doing right now.
And we want him alive, not to mention, because we want justice served. Killing himself would be too easy a way out. So up top with the white distinguished mustache and hair, Jim Van Allen, a certified profiler and an experienced threat and risk assessment specialist, 31 years of experience, a lot of it with the Ontario Provincial Police. And below him, with the Christmas tree, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah to everyone, Scott Roeder, founder of the Evidence Room, an internationally recognized evidence specialist with over 1,500 cases. He's worked since 2001, and he often works as a qualified expert witness. We just found out how smart he is. He also is probably, I would say, we're within 2 or 3 years of each other. You have grown kids. I have an 8, a 6, and a 3-year-old. So it goes to show that Scott is exponentially smarter. Don't you all worry. We'll be right back with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Love you, America and Canada.